Hello and welcome into another episode of Offensively Accurate. Or I guess it's April Fool's Day, so I should say um inoffensive comforts to the April 1st. X has been wild. Just want to say, let me start off here. We have quite a bit to get into. But we have a great opener because my co-host here with me, Donny, got into it with Mr. Phil Labonte. So Donny, we'll go ahead and skip the introduction, man. Why don't you go ahead and start telling us about what you got into it with Phil over, and I'll pull up the tweet in the meantime.
Oh boy. I just it was about the kind of dog piling on Christians. He had like I can't really even remember what started it. He had made a post about, LGBTQ religion trying to like replace Christianity or something, or at least that's the way I took it. And I just kind of called him out and said, that's true. Okay, but what about like the whole Christ is King anti-Semitism thing? Like, why would you call out one community and not the other? And he immediately just was like, well, I'm not a Jew hater like you. Which I thought was crazy because, like, you're calling out one community. Are you suggesting you hate that community? Probably not, since, he was, putting up pictures with, Blair White a little bit later, after that. So I think it's weird you can question one community without just being hateful of the community, but you can't question another. And my point wasn't even like like I don't like them, but clearly it's multiple different groups like dogpiling on Christians. And I don't necessarily even identify as a Christian. I'm somebody that believes in God, but I struggle with organized religion and haven't believed in, the church in quite some time. But like I just, I always end up aligned with the underdog, and that definitely feels like the Christian community right now.
Oh, 100%. I mean, what's crazy is like thinking like that we're the underdog community, but we're also probably like the largest community. I mean, that's numbers. I mean, it's changing now. We're losing our grip on the majority, but to think that like the minority community is seemingly so, because most people, they'll claim to be Christians, but then when the time comes and the iron needs to be struck, will they actually be Christians? I don't know. But a lot of people identify themselves as such, so it's kind of odd we're in this place. But everybody knows how we got here and everything that led up to it. But the specifics of this tweet, I wanted to put them on screen here because I thought it was insane. I wasn't even on X at the time. I actually saw, I think I'd end up seeing you retweeting something again about this. But again, this just goes in lockstep with everything that me and you dislike about the Timcast and Timcast crew. And it was super telling. And I'm really sad sitting here looking at this tweet because yours only got, 114 views on his that got 10,000 impressions. Especially for him responding to you. I mean, what is this, like 10 times? I mean, you guys had like a nice conversation, but the most telling point is this opening portion here where he's taking a stance where, he doesn't like that the Jews that, or not the Jew, forgive me. He doesn't like that, LGBTQ is seemingly attacking, a Christian holiday and it's antagonistic to religion, but he's fine with it from a Judaistic standpoint. He's fine from it from the Daily Wire standpoint. And it's just laughable. And it's funny because right here, he goes straight to, and you respond with, you're fine with Judaism attacking Christianity and will even jump in to help. It's also a religion that preaches genital mutilation, but you're not allowed to talk about that, right? You guys have no self-awareness or intellectual consistency, to which he responds directly with, I think you guys that hate Jews are crazy though. I mean, you could just end it right there and it'd be like, why would you? That's the assumption,
and the
right?
genital mutilation thing specifically, I brought that up because that was in his original tweet, right? He was saying like that the LGBT community was a religion that believes in genital mutilation and is attacking Christianity. So I just pointed out that another group that his platform doesn't allow him to talk about is very similar.
And again, it's like and we're going to get into it here in a little bit later, but again, it's like that Overton window that kind of Ben Shapiro put forward, which is not really an Overton window. It's just more on the grounds of acceptable opinion, because the Overton window would include a range of opinions, but the ones that he was saying was more so like selectively piecing opinions, right? Like some of these are okay, but over here, but not all of the opinions that are this far right. Just some of these ones, and we'll get to that. So let me just start this by saying we have a lot to go through, or I guess we have like a lot more than we normally have to get through. But we'll see if we get to it. But I just have a list here. This itinerary here is saying so Biden declared war on Easter. More crisis conservatives showing their true nature. Glenn Greenwald obliterated Ben. And if you notice too, I wanted to ask you this. Did you notice that nobody besides Candace responded to that Glenn Greenwald piece? At least from what I had saw.
No, I hadn't noticed. I'm still really not that plugged into Twitter. I'm working on it. I'm trying to like, connect with like-minded people, but
It's a dark place sometimes, dude. But no, that's why I wanted to ask you and see if you had responded, because I didn't, and I thought that was quite hilarious, a nice cherry on top. And with that too, Candace moves to threaten to Ben if he doesn't cool it, especially because Ben's kind of going on a little tour now where he's saying things without saying things. The Hodge Twins are taking a huge step to the right. They brought on Jake Shields for a podcast that got a lot of views not too long ago, I believe it was in the past week or so. And they're kind of now aligning themselves with Sovereign Broad, the Nick Fuentes is the more vocal America First sides, less so Republican now. And then two other things, which had been, there's more violent criminals being released. If you remember that riot video that we watched not too long ago where they're just shaking on the fence, those migrants have been released. I forget which judge put that order in, but they have been released back out. And then the Wall Street Apes had another crazy video calling out corporation plans to put bugs in your food. So that was all that I had for the itinerary loaded up here today. So before we get into it, make sure you subscribe to me on YouTube, follow us on X, follow us on Spotify, share the show if you enjoy it, and bother Donny as much as possible. I will appreciate that. He might not, but I will appreciate that. So let's get into it, man.
Oh, man.
Look at a trans person day. And that's where this thing with Phil stems from, right? Which is like everybody who, it's a really easy low-hanging fruit to make fun of this Easter thing. But to declare on the, at the virtue signaling level that they did, for look at a trans person day instead of Easter was just downright demonic. And I think most people thought of that too. But what did you think? What was your opening thoughts on this, Donny?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was bad. Like they have plenty of days, and sure, their argument is, it's always been on this day, and Easter jumps around, and it just happens to be on the same day. But like I looked it up, and I think it's been around for like 15 years. Nobody I know has ever heard of it, right? So it's Transgender Day of Visibility. It's been going on for 15 years. Nobody ever heard of it until it landed on Easter, and the president decided to promote that as the primary holiday of the day and largely ignore Easter until after the backlash. But before we move on too far, a couple things about the Phil thing. You should find the kind of my tweet where I submit what my argument is, because my argument wasn't you have to criticize Israel. My argument was, why can you criticize one community and not the other? It's the one with the big Elmo response, if you can find it.
Yes. Let me look.
But I've always said, like, my biggest problem right now is there's these special laws for special groups, and if you question any of these groups of people, even if you acknowledge all of these collectives that we have now, whether it be Jewish people or Catholic people or racial collectives, all of these collectives, even if you acknowledge that they're all made up of people and there are good and bad people in them, and the groups that use their collective power to do certain things do good and bad things, but it's hard not to notice that there are certain classes of people that if you question that class, you're immediately just labeled an anti-Semitite. If it's anti-Semite, if it's Jewish people, you're labeled a racist. If it's black people, you're labeled a homophobe or a transphobe if it's the LGBTQ community. And you should be able to question all of these groups, because you should understand that there are good and bad people in them with good and bad intentions.
No, and I agree with you. And I honestly, like, what you saying that reminded me, I honestly wanted to put a poll out, because I think this is honestly a good question. Like, who do you think is the most protected group in America? If you were to limit it to those three groups right there, trans, LGBTQ, combine them both, right? I know a lot of the gay community doesn't like being wrapped in, but most of the mainstream does. So we'll just do that. LGBTQ, blacks, or the Jewish community. And like, I'm gonna be honest, like I think trans honestly get attacked quite a bit. For me, it's really down between blacks and Jews. I would say Jews just because I the way it seems and the way that the mainstream does to protect them. I would argue Jews. Maybe you think differently though.
I mean, I guess it would depend on how you're judging, because if you're talking about like protected legally from speech, it's definitely Jewish people.
Oh yeah,
Because
especially with the new laws
there's
they're
all
getting
kinds
passed
of
out.
laws on the books specifically for anti-Semitism. But I mean, my point isn't my point is none of these collective groups are above questioning, right? Like
Yo,
none of them. And you can call me whatever name that you want, but I question everything, so it would just be reasonable that I'm going to question the intentions of groups when they collectivize to push agendas on the rest of the population.
and I agree.
But I can't. It seems like any time I criticize one of these groups, I'm just labeled a name like he did, and then said, "Well, I'm not even going to bother arguing with you because clearly you won't change your mind on hating Jews or whatever." Which it's exactly the same as arguing with the leftists, which is funny. You question something, they call you a name, they say you're a crazy person that's not worth arguing with, so they don't even defend what they've said. And it was like that. Like I don't even dislike Phil.
I
I
do.
actually respect that he at least engaged with me. Um,
Fair. That is fair.
but like, you know, he has no problem calling out all of these other groups. And I just find it odd that there's one that platform isn't allowed to talk about. And Tim was always, you know, pretty honest with the fact that he wanted to build something like the Daily Wire. And it's interesting that neither of those platforms has any room for questioning about that one specific group, but they'll still question those other, even protected groups. Like I'm sure Phil's been called, you know, a homophobe for saying that, you know, or questioning some of the agenda pushed by the gay KK, you know.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, and then it's just like that calls into question. I mean, if anyone gets that big on the right hand side of politics, namely Republican side of politics, but they seemingly always end up having this one group they can't question in the end, it kind of adds more credibility behind Nick Fuentes' arguments. It adds credibility behind what Sovereign Braw's been calling out, and it adds credibility to, you know, all the things that Jake Shields makes fun of, especially when it's so apparent to everyone else. And then now you have like these weird tours where they're denying it all outright. And we're going to get to it too, because I have two tweets from the Censored Men, you know, going further into like this town hall meeting and other Daily Wire employees coming forward. And I just think it's kind of at a certain point, you know, I think the most people get this distaste in their mouths because they're like, dude, like I'm not retarded. So the fact that you're going to keep sitting here and spewing lies to me and pretend like I'm just going to believe it is like, okay, I'll find someone else to listen to. And I think that's kind of been like the general disgust that people have gotten between like the Daily Wire and like Timcast especially. I mean, Timcast did even worse with Eliza Blue, and that's like thing that like not even people care about really. But it was just such a smack in the mouth that it was like, okay, dude, like fine, like I'll listen to somebody else, like because it just rubs you wrong so bad. But I did want to wrap back to your tweet here, that which you had pulled up with the Elmo GIF in it, which is funny. Because you said exactly this: if you believe certain groups of people are above criticism and others aren't, you're inherently un-American. All groups consist of good and bad people and do good and bad things. As Americans, we are free to criticize all groups. If you think anything I said makes me hateful, and that just says the rest, you're an idiot. And it's true, but I mean, it's exemplified in the argument with Phil. But I made this point to you off air in our conversations that I think that just by the proxy of him responding multiple times, he was looking for a gotcha moment so he could shut the conversation down, and you weren't giving that to him, right? So he was like, so he just was like on in a bad faith reaction and had nowhere to go because you kept like putting out the fire. You know, you're like, dude, you're like, bro, I don't hate Jews. Why would you say that? The premise isn't even there, and you just kind of showing like you were intellectually one step faster than him. And I think that's why he responded like 10 different times to you, because he wanted to get that win in the argument that he wasn't going to get.
I don't know, maybe. I don't want to assume malicious intent in like him trying to get a gotcha. Maybe it was a litmus test too, because those people exist. I'm not denying that. And maybe he gets a lot of hate from those people. So maybe it was a litmus test to see, well, if this guy just hates Jewish people, I'm not going to engage. But he didn't really explain why he can question one group and not the other. And I'm a person that is big on individualism, and I understand that there are collective groups, and sometimes you need those collective groups to get things done, especially politically, but also socially. I understand that, but you have to be able to question all those groups, especially when they're doing things that could be harmful to larger society. And I don't want to condemn one of those groups as a whole, because I know people from all these communities. I like people from all these communities. I know people that don't agree with the agenda that has been assigned to them from these communities. So
Correct.
those people are in the communities, and it's okay to question them. So I don't see why it's not okay for everybody to question them, especially when it comes to your group being assigned a specific agenda. Do I want anybody judging me for the sins of some other a white person or some other,
Yeah.
Catholic person? No, and I'm not going to do that to other people, but I will question the agendas of their collective groups as well as the ones that I might be associated with just by, the color I was born or the religion I was raised in.
And it's a fair point. And I mean, I think it goes back to what I said initially, which is like, it just gives people disgust, because it's like, that letdown, that continual kind of letdown, right? Where it's like, again, like, people put their faith into these smaller alternate media or alt media, whatever you want to call it, not alt right, but just alternate media, because they're not huge mainstream. But now that they're working themselves into mainstream, right? Because I mean, let's just be honest, like Timcast is mainstream now, really. It's on the bottom end of being bottom rung of being mainstream, but like, I mean, the general thing of his platform is like having on guests that all are very well known for the most part. I'd argue very few people he ever has come on is like, has less than 20,000 followers on Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. So it's moved, it's very wide reaching. And they're just continually exhibiting exactly what you said, the similar traits to the Daily Wire. And like you had said, he didn't, I don't think he said, like the Daily Wire specifically, but he's always mentioned like he wants to build a network. He wants to build this huge media corporation, which if you were to guess what it'd probably look like, I'm sure he's trying to get it to emulate what the Daily Wire is, seeing he's on that side of the politics anyways. I would like to make a point though, too, anybody who's watching right now, if you disagree with this or agree with this, make sure you can chat in too. Make fun of how me and Donny look. We take that too. And engagement, we appreciate it. But to move it on,
Roast me. It's fine.
yeah, roast Donny. Roast me. I have this clip here from the post millennial here, because this is like the level that I'm talking about, where it's just like where we're treated like we're retarded. Now, this is from Joe Biden and the White House. I mean, namely the press secretary. But this is what it feels like is happening on a mass scale from like the people like the Daily Wire and the Timcast crew. I'll go ahead and play this here. Make sure the volume is not going to blow anybody's eardrums out. And pull it back a little bit. Okay.
Surprised by the misinformation that's been out there around this, and I want to be very clear. Every year.
And again, let me preface this by saying she's talking about the claims that Biden declared Transvisibility Day on Easter. And she already starts by saying that it's misinformation. And again, you have to be retarded to believe this.
Here, for the past several years, on March 31st, Transgender Day of Visibility is marked. And as we know, for folks who understand the calendar and how it works, Easter falls on different Sundays, right? Every year. And this year, it happened to coincide with Transgender Visibility Day. And so that is the simple fact. That is what has happened. That is where we are. And I do want to say a couple of things, because I think it's important here, as you just stated in your questions, what we've been hearing out there, a lot of misinformation done on purpose. And as a Christian who celebrates Easter with family, President Biden stands for bringing people together and upholding the dignity and freedoms of every American. Now, sadly, and it's not surprising, right? It is actually unsurprising that politicians are seeking to divide and weaken our country with cruel, hateful, and dishonest rhetoric. It is dishonest. what we have heard the past 24 hours. It is untrue what we heard over the weekend.
Now, to be fair, she is correct in the fact that the Easter Sunday falls on different days throughout the year. And she's also correct on the fact that the Trans Day visibility has been instituted since 2009. What she's trying to say, though, or act like, is that Biden didn't virtue signal for Transgender Day visibility over Easter. And that's definitely what happened. Now, the reason why people are upset is because they are concerned with why the president of the United States is nodding his head towards transgenderism holidays instead of, the self-proclaimed Catholic nodding his head towards any value or virtue of Easter or the Christian faith. And you tie that in too with the fact that just before this, they had an Easter egg roll, something along those lines. It was an Easter egg painting contest. In this contest, they banned religious themes. So for Easter egg paintings, they banned religious themes. And if you don't believe me, make sure I'll pull it up here. Yes, from Clown World here. Clown World posted this, and I'll put it on screen as well for a second, just so you know I'm not lying to you. The White House banned religious themes in their 2024 Easter egg art contest. And to make it even worse, it was for National Guard kids. So if anything, that should have definitely been housed. And in my opinion, it should have definitely been Christian leading, especially because it's all a bunch of military age kids or military service members, children. I want to swing it to you, Donny. Make sure I go back here. We've been on this for a minute, but the reality is I think most people kind of see this and and like what your response was like, I'm going to go pick up a Bible. Other popular responses, like from the quartering as well, from seeing this kind of crazy stuff was like, okay, this is getting so insane. Like, I think I might go to church tomorrow. And I think that's kind of been where people are at, maybe a lot who are paying attention, but maybe aren't so religious, I would say, because they're seeing such a spiritual growth and entity around transgenderism and it being, blatantly satanic and demonic. And it's having the opposite effect. So instead of getting people to look at trans people, they're like, I'm going to go read my Bible. And I think that's kind of the sentiment that I got from you, Donny, which was like, I'm going to start looking around for churches, man. Like, I think this stuff is getting so insane. Like, I'm going to ground myself again, but I'll let you talk to that.
Well, really all that is me taking my own advice. Like, if you follow me on Twitter, you've undoubtedly seen me post. If you don't know what to do what it is that they clearly don't want you to do. So I think I even posted something about like I should find a church. Like I was raised Catholic. I don't really want to go back to the Catholic Church. I have an issue with organized religion. Even though I have faith in God and I've read the Bible as well as many other holy texts of different religions. But it's just gross. Like, and it is, and it's pandering, but it's also pandering to such a small portion of the population. But I think they want that portion of the population to be everybody. They want to completely remove the whole idea of gender from society and have all of these androgynous looking ladyboy things walking around. That's what I think they ultimately want. So it's not surprising that they're pandering to that group. Also, interestingly enough, Candace put out that piece about how she would bet her career that Bridget Macron is a man. So maybe they're pandering to a small group, but maybe that small group is a lot more powerful than we were, led to believe.
And that's something that's I think we pointed out, on our last episode, which was, what's the possibility that none of this is even related to Israel whatsoever, and that Candace Owens is actually canned because the Bridget Macron thing was a little bit too outside of their window and not the Israel positioning. The evidence to that would be the fact that the 2 deleted videos of her show shortly after she left were both the Bridget Macron videos. I'm thankful that Donny sent them to me before I watched them before they got nuked. So I have an idea of where she was going with that. Some of the investigations and journalists that's been jailed for trying to investigate into it. And
Tim Pool, they tried to shut that down on his show too. Remember, they made fun of her without actually covering any of the evidence she talked about in the video.
Well, that's
and
what
the Daily Wire just conveniently fired her. So both of those big platforms tried to shut down that.
Well, I thought it was funny because that clip that I saw, because I didn't see the full portion. I think it was like a 10-minute clip they reposted because they separate their shows and segments into these smaller clips. And no joke, the literal photo that Tim goes to click on to share on screen live on air is the one that Candace debunks, who is supposedly the ex-husband of Bridget's, before she married Emmanuel. And in reality, it's not true, and again, because I watched this Candace video, Candace got the full photo, because the one that's all over the internet is actually zoomed in. It's a faculty photo from where she supposedly met Emmanuel. But if you zoom out, you can see she's not standing with her husband and kids in the corner of the picture. It's actually like a cropped photo of faculty members standing with kids. So if you were to take a small little portion of that and clip it, it kind of looked like a family photo, and that's probably exactly what they were going for. Which, honestly, I never even thought about that whole thing, which was not the Bridget McCrone stuff, but maybe the pandering aspect of the LGBTQ community, what they're doing with Joe Biden, is because maybe listen, Big Mike's a thing over here in the U.S. Like, maybe there is some truth to the fact that there is some secret, even higher on the hierarchy than the JQ group of just some elite woman. But I was going to go with the more grounded theory that I have running, which is I think they expect just people to die out. I think that they expect faith and a lot of religious stuff to slowly die. I think a lot of what you see, because a lot of people bring up the whole point of it's a small majority of the LGBTQ people, but the reality is, the younger you go, the generations, that number actually ticks up quite a bit. Now, if you go, especially with Gen Z, I think the recent numbers now are almost 30%, if not more, of Gen Z identifies as LGBTQ. So I'm almost seeing this as like they're done, not even pandering whatsoever to anybody over the age of 35. And everything they're doing now is specifically aimed at capturing the new generation, which again coincides alongside, a color revolution, which is similar to like how they ran things down with Mao and the color revolution that occurred in China. And I'm almost thinking that, especially with what you've seen, they've taken such a overt stance against Christianity. And especially when you kind of track it with the youth, I know there's some base Gen Z dudes out there. I mean, I think if you extrapolate that, I still think that there's probably more people who align and affirm along the LGBTQ line in Gen Z than there are those who would oppose it outright and take the stance of like eliminating it entirely. And so I think that's probably what the goal of the White House is, to capture the ideals of the youth and not even care about the older people. And perhaps part of this is by proxy of the fact that they know the vaccination in 2 years, the death count might start ticking up a lot faster than what we think it is right now. And again, that's just an opinion, YouTube overlords. That is my opinion. But that's just the way I see it, and to be fair, and this is why I see it like this too, because I'm going to pair it with some of this other commentary, because Lauren Chen's been very impressive, at least to me here lately. She's the one who hosted the space with Jeremy Boring and Nick Fuentes, or Candace Owens, I should say, before inevitably he got banned off the platform again, which is sad too, because like you had people like Joel Berry, like he's a huge cuck, and there's some other people as well. And they just started snitching on the guy because their arguments got owned. And it's like that. It's just pathetic. I even commented on one of his posts too. Like, that's just pathetic, dude. But anyways, on screen, what I have put up here is Lauren Chen has been getting further and further more vocal. And I think I would put her in this group along with the Hodge Twins, who are kind of separating themselves from mainstream media. Don't let me forget either. Like, Elijah Schaffer is also another huge pundit that's also kind of aligning himself with America First and moving away from establishment Republican politics. And I saw this tweet from Ashley St. Clair, and those of you who follow me know I'm literally no fan of Ashley St. Clair whatsoever. And she said this in response, kind of mimicking the lines of the press secretary that we just heard, which was, Trans Day visibility has been on March 31st since 2009. Yada, yada, yada. Joe Biden issued proclamations other years. And she says in the final line, nobody did anything to anger Christians Easter Sunday. First of all, that's just like, get bent, Ashley. Like, that's a straight lie. Like, clearly they did. Like, you can't go on X with thousands of people angry, millions of people angry, and then you go, well, look, no one's mad. Like, okay, like you whatever, dude. Again, it's just classic, Daily Wire type people acting this way. And anybody saying this should not be taken seriously now or ever. So let that be a warning to anybody listening to me right now, that Ashley St. Clair said you should not be taking me seriously now or ever. So let that be known. But what's hilarious is Lauren quotes this by saying, all this proves is that they've been angering Christians since 2009. She's not buying the bait of like, oh, guys, everyone just misunderstands. Like, no. Like it's just this one day, and like Easter falls on those other days. Like, no, like he wasn't saying this. Like, and it's like, come on, dude. Like, nobody buys that. And I turn this back to you, Donny, which is like, this is the Christless conservatism stuff I've been trying to call out for forever. And these people just keep making it easier to identify them. But I said a lot there.
I mean, but to act like he didn't do anything, like he banned religion from a religious holiday. He banned like religion from a kid's artwork contest about a religious holiday. So to say he didn't do anything and it's just a coincidence that these 2 days fell on the same day and is just disingenuous. It's completely disingenuous because he very much spent the whole day talking about Transgender Visibility Day, and I didn't see anything about Easter go up until people were just blowing him up on Twitter. Him and Kamala, every time they posted something about it, like just got destroyed in the comments. So I mean, to act like he didn't do anything and it just is a coincidence that they fell on the same time this year is just bullshit.
No, and I agree. I mean, listen, let me ask you this. Oh, well, hold on. I got a comment in here. It's from Kukla. She says, nice to be here. I think it's a she. Forgive me if it's not. To my brothers and sisters, happy Easter Monday for the Western calendar Christians. From an Eastern Christian Orthodox, our resurrection day is May 5th, one lunar month after. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. Happy Easter to you too. I probably misspelled that. I apologize. But let me. I will go back to the tweet here. If you read this, Donny, and say you had no idea who Ashley St. Clair was, like, what was the vibe that you get from this tweet here? Well, you would assume that this is like clearly like. Well, that's what I'm saying. This is a good point, because you don't know who she is. You would probably assume that this person leans left, just if you just only had this one tweet to go off of. And that's,
but I mean,
go ahead.
I was just gonna follow up with I see that from like a lot of conservatives where they post tweets that I think they're just trying to get views, but they're like, if I didn't know better, I would assume leftists. Like even Philibante, the fact that he responded by just calling me a name, like that is every leftist I've ever argued with. And they do that because they can't argue their position. I think he also like came at me for like a spelling mistake, but like I work a full-time job. I've got a family. Shit posting on Twitter is not my main gig. And I mean, if you get paid like, I'm assuming quite a bit of money to talk about politics, you should be able to defend what you're posting publicly. I mean, it would be silly if somebody came to me about something I said on the show or something and came to ask about like, well, why do you think that? It would be silly if I just called them a name and was like, well, it's not worth arguing. Well, why would I say it if it's out of line to even ask about it?
I do remember you saying that because he did get it was like hypocrite or something you spelled wrong. And he like went at it. Yeah, I do remember that. It's hilarious.
I mean, if you can't attack an idea, it's easy to attack spelling or grammar. So yeah, I made a typo, but I mean, it also showed me that like you have no leg to stand on. Otherwise, you wouldn't come after that.
No, right,
Oh,
exactly.
I wore a beanie today. This one is orange. They do come in other colors. Can confirm.
That's to
PSA for
Tim,
anybody
right?
that needs to know. No. Anybody that needed to know that they do come in other colors.
It's fair though. That's fair. I actually, it's hilarious. You have an orange one on. My wife actually just got me an orange one. I don't think I can reach it from here. She just got me an orange one not too long ago. I don't like it because it looks like it's super like hunter. Like I'm gonna go out hunting, like I'm in my hunting gear. I just try to avoid wearing it. Plus, I don't have too many things that can match with like bright orange, unless it's like jet black or something. Let's see. Oh, two more comments here from Kukla. Thanks to the Jew hatred for Christians, our mantra from here on in will be Christ is King. Amen, sister. She also says, "Hell hath no fury," as they say, like a woman, a female Christian scorn. Candace will be returning after, most likely she visits the Holy Land to have her peace and say online. Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping we honestly do get, I mean, it's going to happen either way, right? If we go back to the Daily Wire stuff. Like, I think one of these walls is going to get burst. I think if it's not the Daily Wire kind of laying things out and doing whatever they can to get around violating contracts while giving their audience as much of their narrative side of the version of the story as possible, they will. Or it goes the other way, and Candace just says, F it, I'll eat the fines and the legal fees from, breaking my NDA. Here's what they did. Here's what happened. I think it's bound to happen, and if it doesn't happen that way, someone will leak it. It's like the truth will find its way out. It's just a matter of time, at least for me, especially given these situations. I've seen them happen so many times. Like, it's generally how it plays out. She also says she's playing it cool, sitting back and watching Benny Boy and all the other Semites dig their own graves first. I mean, that's kind of, we're going to get into it. I mean, I have the clip from Glenn Greenwald. We're going to go to it shortly here in a second. But I do agree. I think a lot of what they've done is really bad PR. I mean, the best PR is what Dylan Mulvaney did when he started getting boycotted from Bud Light. He literally went MIA for like 5 months and then he came back and it's been okay. He didn't take too much of a hit. I honestly think the Daily Wire crew probably should have done the same. Maybe not all of them, but probably Ben at least, Jeremy as well. Allow Matt and Michael to keep doing their show and avoid the comments, but they can't do it. I think there's too much of a moral attachment to this issue that either Ben or Jeremy is going to let loose on it very, very soon. Let me actually go back to the itinerary here to make sure I'm caught up. If we don't go to there was another gaffe from Joe Biden. He said oyster bunnies instead of Easter bunnies. I had that pulled up. We can we'll skip that. And then, yeah, they banned the religious themes for the Easter art comments. So, okay, we'll go ahead. We'll go to this then. So this is the Glenn Greenwald clip I talked about in the very beginning of the show, which I have not seen get much play at all. But it does have 4 million views here because Candace quote tweeted it. How many does the original have? Okay, the original's got quite a bit too. But mainly I would imagine because Candace Owens has done it. I also would imagine that they have some kind of algorithm on X that knows like who's in the current drama. So like it'll prioritize tweets from these accounts. At least that's the way it seems to me. But let's go ahead. I mean, I wanted to actually react. And I want to do this like roundtable panel style. So anytime you want to talk or say something about what's being said, Donny, just let me know. I'll pause it. I'd like this to be like we both attack it from any side. Because I don't know if you've seen this clip.
Okay. Oh, I think I have.
Have you? Okay.
I think so. Run it. We'll take a look.
Make sure the audio is okay.
But here's the real meat of the matter when Ben Shapiro tries to explain what line it is that Candace Owens crossed.
And so when it comes to the hosts on the Daily Wire, obviously everyone is able to say what they want. Nobody ever comes to me and says, you can't say X. Nobody ever says that to Walsh. And no one ever said that to Candace. But the reality is that there is an Overton window at the Daily Wire. Obviously, there was a non-meeting of the minds. That's pretty much all I can say on this. And, you know, a lot of this has happened publicly. But to the extent that the Daily Wire is in fact not a publisher, it is that is in fact not a platform, it is a publisher. That means that there is no moral obligation for the Daily, and there's no free speech problem with the Daily Wire saying we don't wish to pay a particular host, or that host saying I don't wish to work here anymore, because again, there's a parting of the ways that is not really open for discussion at this point.
Does it surprise you that
Okay, so let's hear this question.
so many people, even on our side of this, are confused about that as it relates to free speech and quote unquote cancel culture? Like severing a business tie, as long as you're not throwing someone in jail, they're able to be everywhere else, is not.
I'm not super surprised at the controversy.
Yeah.
Okay, these people, honestly, if I'm being totally honest, they make me sick. They cannot think.
So you can clearly hear what he's putting forward, right? Which is, because the Daily Wire identifies themselves as a distinct publisher instead of a platform, that they have no problem with excising those opinions of those people who they don't agree with, which Glenn Greenwald's about to go into with the Ronna McDaniels thing. But I think you can stretch that to any and all times that they've ever said this. I mean, the Daily Wire has been a what would you call that? Like a beacon on the hill for any time any other kind of company wants to like not support a Trump supporter or excises somebody for having right-wing beliefs or so on and so forth. They'll generally be one of the companies that has the first thing to say about it. And then when it comes to themselves, they're like, actually, well, we have these own specific rules that we play by, which I can understand. I get it from a business perspective. Like if you have a specific goal and a mission set out by your company, and then one of your hosts is now no longer, coinciding with that goal, or they're actively working against it, I think it's well within your business, ability to get rid of this individual. I mean, just, if you have a contract, that's one thing, you can't get rid of people during contracts, but I would argue, especially like they shouldn't have to hold them there. But the reality is they're just not being honest for the reasons why.
Yeah. But I hate when you put me in a position to defend people that I'm not interested in defending. But let's say your show takes off, right? You're the big boss, man.
Yeah.
Company's blowing up. You can't do 6 shows yourself. So you decide my opinions maybe are close enough to yours that our goals are at least aligned enough that we're not contradicting each other's mission, right? They're not the same, but currently speaking, it's fair to say they're aligned.
Right.
Let's say then you hire another woman host to do a show, and it turns out she's pushing radical feminism and all this stuff that your mission is totally against. Why would you pay somebody to undermine your mission? That I get.
Yep.
I think that's fair. And if the Israel thing was the problem and that's the line, I do think it's unfortunate that that's your mission, is to protect Israel. And if it was the Bridget McCrone thing and they decided, well, that's too out there for it to be on our platform and to undermine the other things that we're talking about. Again, I think that's well within their right as a company. I don't necessarily agree with the principles behind it, but I agree that they have that right to do that.
Yeah, and I guess because if you were to put it, I guess they technically discriminated against her based on her political stance. But given that their business is in the business of politics, I feel like maybe that's the one place that's allowed an exception, right? Because then it waters down like what the company really does. I don't really want to defend the Daily Wire either. Go ahead.
No, and I'm not even one of those people that has to pick sides, but I definitely lean Candace in this. But if I start a record label, I'm gonna have bands on the label that I like because I'm paying them. It's my passion that started the company. I had an idea of what the company wanted to be, and I wanted to support music that I liked. So I'm not gonna pay bands that are playing pop country or music that I just don't like, and that's kind of how I see this whole thing. And it is different than like, say, Nick Fuentes being banned from X, right? Because that's a public square where all opinions are supposed to be. But like again, when Elon decided, well, I'm not going to pay Don Lemon more money to do his show because I think he's an asshole and I don't really like his opinions. I mean, that's fair game, right?
Yeah.
Because he still let him on the platform. But that's the difference between like that platform and I guess they call it like a publisher, but I mean, it's the Daily Wire was never supposed to be anyone's town square. It was their bullhorn.
No, exactly. That's why I have a bigger problem with the fact that Nick Fuentes isn't allowed on X, no matter how many, different million accounts he does make. And, that's because, that is like, I mean, if you wanted to actually make a point of difference, there's a big difference between, what X is versus what Daily Wire is, especially because the majority of what you can even access on Daily Wire is behind a paywall, where the majority of what you can get on X is, is free and publicly available for the most part. But again, it's like,
well, the sad part is all those people are the kind of people that are like, oh, free speech, the free market of ideas. We should be able to have conversations. Now, I believe in the free market of ideas. If you have a bad opinion and you want to go march and yell it in the street, please do, because then I know I should look out for that guy. I don't want to hang out with that guy. He's got stupid ideas. Yeah. But like everybody should be allowed to spew even the dumbest ideas. And the fact is, most people will understand that they're dumb ideas most of the time. So,
very true.
To decide somebody's ideas are too dangerous for you to even hear them makes me want to hear what they have to say. Like, what ideas could they have that are that dangerous that they're not allowed to speak where literally everyone else is? Like that guy, Josh, like he's been like trying to get monetized on X, and they keep telling him no. Even though there are some accounts spewing some crazy ideas on here that are monetized, so I just don't get how he said we're gonna make it the best free speech platform. How where everybody gets to talk, and then there are some people whose ideas are just too dangerous for them to be like, all right, well, you get to say what you want to.
Right, exactly. I mean, this was the fear when he had hired, I think her name is Linda Yaccarino, I believe was her name. She's like the head Twitter staffer of like, of account management or something along those lines. She's essentially like their policy police person. She has ties to the WEF and other globalist interests, which is what, a lot of people were instantly like, yikes, because it was a couple months after not a couple months. I think it might have even been almost 6-7 months after he bought the platform. And people are like, well, it was fun while it lasted. And then, I mean, again, like here we are down the line, seeing more instances like this. And Josh Hu, for people who aren't familiar with, you want to look him up on X. I think it is literally is Josh Hu.
You should.
Yeah, I believe it's not even that to getting monetized. I think his account was monetized at one point and that they removed it. They demonetized him. And he's been posting public screenshots of his conversations with whether, I'm assuming a lot of these responses he's getting are from just bots that are auto-responding to him because he's probably on a list somewhere.
Surprised by the misinformation that's been out there around this, and I want to be very clear.
Where is that coming from?
For the past several years, on March 31st,
well, forgive me.
Transgender Day.
That was hilarious. A random tab started playing that. But it's just sad, because it's clearly a guy. And what made me sad was I think Josh Hu even at a certain point posted a picture of his family and was saying like, do these people not deserve to eat? Do these people not deserve? And it's all sad. It's like, it's very depressing. And he's someone who's like not even at all aligned like with the neo-Nazi movement, like, with people try to attach with Nick Fuentes. This is just some guy who's posting like as much as possible about all of the deep, dark secrets of our government, our history, all of the things that you normally aren't going to find on you're not going to find any half of this on a Daily Wire, show host page. You're not going to find any of it on Timcast page. And it's just depressing because it's somebody screaming at the top of their lungs, providing people with news and information, and then they're punished for it. And so, yeah, again, like this brings back to those ties where it's like Elon's really probably not the savior people call him out to be. There's clearly some kind of interests that are aligned that he wants to have Twitter, but I don't think they entirely align with the free market of ideas that me and you have in our heads. I think he's got more maybe of a business elitist version of it.
Oh, I don't know. I do like Elon. I think he's a net positive. I don't know what goes on in that man's head or why maybe some people aren't being given the same chance to speak their opinions, especially from somebody that seems to be like a free market economics guy as well as a free market ideas guy. I definitely think it's an injustice, and Josh, who was one of the first accounts that I followed, and was like, "Oh, this guy knows what's going on." So the Nick thing I get a little bit more, but again, let bad ideas be, cleansed by sunlight. Let's see what wins out.
Right. And I think that's what they fear. I think they fear that. I mean, that's the only explanation I can think of, is that they truly fear that Nick Fuentes' ideas and his purview would gain momentum. And, especially because he is right situated on the spectrum, like he clearly would eat at what the Daily Wire have built up. He'd eat at what Tim Pool has built up. I mean, and I think he's already knocking on the door. You're talking about somebody who's, entirely banned off of all the main platforms. And there's murmurs and clamoring in every one of those platforms, whispers in the back room, like Fuentes, like every platform you're on. And so it's like what I told you earlier when we were messaging was like, it's like the biggest Streisand effect of all time. Like he has been so misaligned and smeared nonstop, while at the same time, no one's allowed to ever see or hear this man, which all in all develops into this huge national effect where he's now this huge icon. People have very little idea of what he says. And if they do, it's like small 30-second to a minute clips that are posted from people that aren't him, because he's not allowed to have his own page. And so now you have like this just, big scary monster. And it seems, especially when you see the ratios here on X, you see the way the public, the public square as it is, interacts regarding these recent ideals, and the way the October 7th all the way until this Candace Owens exit. It looks to me like the America First movement is, going toe to toe with the Daily Wire, at least for interaction and engagement and support. And I think that's what they feared the entire time. That's why they tried to eliminate him. But because it's America, it makes it really hard to eliminate somebody's First Amendment right. And then, with things like Rumble, X, I think, what is it? Is it Cozy? Is that the other one? Like Cozy TV, I think. Like he's found all these back channels that allowed him to be on, and, he's still got his message out. And so I think, again, it goes back to what I said earlier, like truth may take a while, but it will come out eventually.
Well, and all they did was kind of martyr the guy, right? Like, and I don't align with many of his politics. I think he's funny. He's a good speaker. But him and his followers want very much a new America, and it makes me nervous, just like the left makes me nervous, right? Because like I said earlier, I just want everybody to leave me alone. I don't want to live under the authoritarian government the left is currently pushing. I don't want to live under the authoritarian right that some people on the right want. I just want to be left alone. Just fuck off and just leave us alone. Like I'm not saying I'm not full libertarian where I think, like there shouldn't be any laws about anything, like kids should do drugs and, people should get abortions and chop off their genitals. I'm just not that guy, but like we got to find a happy medium between these two things where it isn't like a left-wing authoritarian government or right-wing authoritarian government. I kind of want to like find a happy medium between those two areas, where I can, just live a simple life.
No. And I already know the answer to this, which is, if the government can only be authoritarian, which hand would you rather it sit on? I think most people would rather it sit on the right-hand side. I think the numbers of dead bodies on both sides, I think between metrics kind of points to that as well, too. But it's not like we have to pick between those two. I mean, my point is like, I think, and I'm going to say this too, like, I think you're more of a counter-revolutionary. You're more of a restorationist. You want to just simply vacate all of the excess and get back to the original system that was put in place. and kind of eliminate all of the crap that's been installed and put upon it and kind of pull things back to normal, which I agree with you. I would take that. My issue with that, though, is not that I have an issue with the ideal. My issue is that I don't think there's any pragmatic sense to ever get it done anymore. I think that there's so many people, whether it's between the welfare state, child support, alimony, there's so many systems in place that so many thousands of people depend on. I think like if you wanted to be more of a even the restoration position would end up, you'd have to get, like, there'd be dead bodies at the end of that position, because you're going to have people who would fight you to the death
at the end of all of these positions.
Yeah. And
there's no position that is going to be put forward right now that isn't going to have at least some bodies at the end of it. But if those, the thing is, because I'm such a long time lurker, I know the authoritarian rights positions just as well as everybody else is now figuring out the authoritarian left position. And I know eventually it's going to get to like, oh, he's got tattoos, he's a degenerate, he listens to degenerate music, or, look at that family, they don't go to church. Like, I don't want that either.
Yeah.
And you, when you're talking about stuff like this, you can't just think, well, I know where this is going to stop, because once you start one of these movements, you don't get to decide where it stops. The movement will take over and they will push that idea to the extremes. So even though there might be an authoritarian right government where you can be like, all right, well, this is where we stop and this is how we don't go to the extremes, eventually extreme people are going to push it to the extreme. And especially with social media, because like I'm so politically unlovable on these platforms, because you have to be extreme to get views and stuff. The most extreme tweets are the ones with all the views and the likes. So when I say, hey, every class or collective group is open to question by American citizens, and somebody's like, yeah, but watch out, that person's like a race mixer. I'm like, holy shit, we're not the same at all. Like, so I do see that there's that exists on X, but like you have to know where to stop these ideologies, and people just don't stop them. Like the leftists, like, oh, inclusivity and like everybody gets treated equally. They could have stopped that at a certain point and been closer to where they wanted to be than where they ended up, where they're chopping off people's body parts to make them feel better.
Well, listen, I've already seen some of that stuff. It already actually has kind of made me nervous. Like I get on sometimes, and like even from some of the accounts I follow and love, they'll be like, under Christian nationalism, tattoos will be banned, and I'm like, okay, come on now, like it's a little too far even for me. Like who cares, dude? Like let these people get tattoos, and I get it. Like a lot of them is like in jest, but there's some of those accounts that aren't. Like there's some accounts like I can't remember the one. It's like Soul Bra. There's a bunch of them that are like that are like, they're a bunch of, I mean, it's really just very homoerotic, but it's a bunch of dudes sitting out in the sun, and like they'll take like a bunch of 3-second frame clips, tie them all together, and it's like, here's my daily routine, and it's like them doing yoga in the sun, them like getting railed in the back in the sun, like a bunch of just weird stuff like that. But then they're the same accounts that sit there and go like, well, yeah, but like tattoos are bad for you and here's why. And then it's like, but like, come on, dude, it's like, I think everything you're doing is giving you estrogen. Like, who are you to be on this platform saying this? But I'm already seeing it. There's calls for it. I think it's very puritanical, but it's like, it's that natural pendulum swinging. Like, when you have the existence of such degenerate chaos for so long, it would only, just basic physics, you would expect the equal reaction, which would be people who just want complete order. No
but
stepping out.
But it's not going to be an equal reaction, though, because there
Correct.
are people that will use the natural movement of the pendulum to swing it harder than it naturally would in the other direction. And to be honest, both sides make me nervous.
Yeah, I know. And I think we're on the precipice of it swinging hard back to the right. And we even had this, we had another conversation with off air, which is like, that's what you view me to be. You view me to be a pendulum pusher, which I agree with you. Like, I'm somebody who actively am like, I'll pull it if I have to. I won't even push. I'll push, pull, punch it, kick it, whatever. I'll do whatever it takes to get it to stop being on the left hand side. But I say that because I know it's inevitable. I know that the swing back's inevitable. So, catch it as its inception. If we're gonna get this natural swing back right, let it be naturally Christian. Let's let it move back to the natural Christian ethos that it is. I mean, you even had, I think Richard Dawkins came out and was talking about how he views himself as a cultural Christian, even though he doesn't believe, but he knows that, culturally Christianity being the most prominent tenet of the society is the better place for our country to be than whatever the heck is going on right now. And that's where I kind of agree. I mean, I would even take it a bit more further. Like, I'm somebody who also echoes the sentiment of Nick Fuentes, like, repeal the 19th, dude. If we can take it further back to the right, and then I can take it one more inch to get that too, like, you better bet I'm gonna be dragging that pendulum, man. And that's what gets people. That's what gets Nick Fuentes. I think it was the Post Millennial, or no, it's the Hill. The Hill put out an article, comparing Benjamin Franklin or Nick Fuentes to Benjamin Franklin, because most people point out, Benjamin Franklin was against slavery even back then. He had some ideals that people kind of moved to see that were a bit more positive than what were accepted during his time, but he clearly was ahead of the race, as it were, and so he's kind of drawing that same ire, I guess not ire, but the same hype as the founding fathers, and I'm with him on that. Like, I think this country would be better served were we to repeal the 19th, but that only happens if we get the pendulum to swing as hard as we need it to back to the right hand side. I know Donnie's loading his pipe
You would
now.
have to swing way too far for that to happen that I'm comfortable with. Because, again, I just want to be left alone, and neither side is going to do that, right? If Nick Fuentes, like, if he ended up ruler for a day, I wouldn't want to live under his ideals either, right? Because it's just a different government telling me different things that I can't do. Like, they could decide the music I like, or the drugs I do, or
That's the first thing I'm going for is the music.
My wife showed some ankle at the beach, and now we're getting court-martialed by some, I don't like authoritarianism. That's my big problem. Either way, if the government ends up authoritarian, like, I'm just not into it.
I hear you.
And that doesn't mean I think everything Nick says is wrong. Like I said earlier, we talked a little off camera. I think he started too young, because I was a lurker. I saw him pretty early in his career, and he couldn't decide whether he wanted to be somebody that had a message, or an edgy teenager trolling on the internet. And I think that really dampened his message. I think he probably should have picked one of those things. And I still see him doing that. I mean, he's still a young guy, but, like, I still see him doing that. And his followers know what's jokes and what's not, but nobody else does.
Right.
So you gotta either pick. Do you wanna have a message that means something, or do you want to be an edgy troll? Because you have one of those things undermining the other thing.
Listen, you saying that made me think of three different things. The first one being, we can get back to this, which would be an overarching philosophical question. But I used to think that there was an existence of, no authoritarianism. But I'm quickly have been put under the spell, which is that I think religion takes the place no matter what. I think whether people believe in a God, they find religion. So with that being said, I think if you try to even pull things back to a classical, liberal, secular state, I think it naturally wants to move to idolize something, as you're seeing with what our current state is, right? It's moving to idolize LGBTQ, idolizing DEI, idolizing minority, idolizing victimization, idolizing oppression. Like, something has to be the religion, of a nation state. So I guess my point back to you is, I guess if I'm under the spell that that's the only way things can be, with the evidence of the history of how our country's been ran, then I'm like, okay, well, at least let me put something that I value as like being, a net positive, such as Christianity. Like, at least make that be the tenet that holds over the nation state, rather than LGBTQ, or rather than communism, or rather than socialism. Like, at least let Christianity be the tenet. At least that's the way that I'm approaching it from. But the other two things I wanted to say was, one, a question, which is, do you fear or do you think that Fuentes would ever himself entertain politics? And two, my add-on to that, which is, I don't even think that he would need to run in politics. I think you start getting like America First candidates in there, but who are like in name only because they're like essentially aligned with Nick Fuentes politics. I think that's a real possibility. I think you start seeing that in the next coming years. And then my third thing I was going to say was, yeah, dude, Nick Fuentes is only 25 years old. Like, he's very, very young. Yeah, he's super young. And so to begin amassing power, like, I guess clout, I would rather say.
He was basically a child when he started too. And like I said, I was a lurker since like the early 2000s. So I've been familiar with him since he started. I mean, like I said, he makes me nervous. Could he run for politics one day? Sure. He would definitely have to soften out his views, or at least change them to make them a little more palatable to the mainstream. I mean, I'm not for compromising your opinions, but the fact is, if you want to run for political office, you do need the mainstream to vote for you. Groypers by themselves aren't going to get you elected. Now, I don't totally know if he'd even want to get into politics, or what his views would be if he finally did. But I mean, he's a charismatic guy. But yeah, no, he makes me nervous. I probably wouldn't vote for him unless he softened out quite a bit. And I don't believe that you need to have an authoritarian nation for it to be kind of a Christian focused state. I think you could probably do that without it being an authoritarian place, unless you're like insisting that you can only be Christian, or that you're mandating church for people. Like, I think you can be a Christian first state with the way the Constitution is set up, and still, let people practice their own religion. And, I would never tell anybody not to pronounce their faith, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, otherwise. Even though, I have particular issues with kind of all of those organizations, as far as like not their biblical scriptures, but, they're man-made organizations. But
Well, that's why I'm more so saying no. Like my belief originally was that you could. I'm more so saying, like, if this was the experiment of that and this is the result, I'm like, I guess what evidence do I have to believe that a government won't make something its religion if we allow it to, because the way the Constitution's constructed and the way most people believe, at least on some baseline level, the way it's taught, is the freedom of religion, is the freedom of speech, is the freedom of expression. And so because no religion is the head of state, I should say, therefore something must become it. Right. And I think you see that like with how the LGBTQ agenda has evolved, like DEI, essentially like all of the fake tenets of saving our democracy, as the Democrats and the progressives scream, has become the religion in this country of the West. Social justice war, has become the religion. So I'm saying that as like, I guess, what evidence do I have to believe that such a thing is possible, if with everything that took place, with all of what had to have taken place for the founding fathers to have done what they did, to set up such a beautiful piece of parchment that laid out all these foundations. I agree with you on that. I don't think you need to have authoritarianism to operate a Christian state. I'm saying, how long until it's not that way anymore? Because I think on a long enough timetable, this will happen more times than not, if not always, which is the complete voiding of religion and the replacement of the bureaucrat seeking agenda.
Well, so the communism part of it that's going on, obviously they go after religion. That's what communists always do during the takeover. The first thing they do is attack God and religion and the nuclear family. That's classic playbook. But if there is a Christian kind of nationalist movement where I'm living under Christians, I don't mind. We have similar values. I was raised Catholic, so I understand them, even though it's been a while since I've associated with a church as an organization. I understand their belief system. I understand their values. I'd be okay living under that government power structure, but also don't want them forcing me to do things, right? Like I do think the country would be better if people understood and lived under more Christian values instead of this self-worship that the left has pushed. I would be fine living in that place. My problem is when that government has to be authoritarian. Like, why does it have to be? I don't think it does. It might need to be vigilant. It might be, need to figure out a way to combat takeovers like we're experiencing now. But that doesn't mean that it needs to force me to do, what it wants. Like, I don't want them forcing me. I don't want you forcing me.
No, I agree with that. What if it was like negative
I think
rights?
it could be done without it having to be authoritarian. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
No, you're good. You're good. I was going to say, what if it was done like with the same way that the negative rights are done with our Bill of Rights, which is like, you don't have to go to church, but like we're not going to allow you to worship Satan. Like along those tenets, right? Like, you don't have to go to church. You don't have to be a Christian, but you can't be a Satanist. Right? Like those are terms I can agree with, right? I mean, I would be okay with that, but that would be authoritarian, and that's a step to the right of freedom of religion. But that would be something I'd be okay with doing.
Are you asking if I'd be okay with that?
Yeah. I wanted to see what your stance was.
Oh man, it's tough because it's going to put me into a place of inconsistency. Because I would be okay with that, but only because of the damage I've seen done by people that believe in Satan. Like, if you asked me that question when I was 16, I'd be like, man, they're all just edgy. They're making music. They're singing about the devil. Like, it's not a big deal. But like, as I've grown up, I've seen more power in these kind of satanic cults, and it is unnerving, and I don't like it. So would I personally be okay with that, even though it is limiting liberty? Yeah, I kind of would. And I also don't think they would have a very good argument as far as, well, this should be covered under freedom of religion, because it's not really a long-standing religion. It's not even really a religion at all. It's kind of an anti-religion, like maybe atheism. So I mean, I'd be okay with it, but I know a lot of shit about the world that I don't want to get into that makes me more okay with it.
That's fair. We don't have to go into it, but like, I guess what I was proposing would be like, maybe it's more so along the lines of like authoritarianism when it comes to the externalities. Like, if I can quantify that there's no positive externalities, or if the positive externalities outweigh, like if banning Satanism, the positive externalities of banning Satanism outweigh the positive externalities of not banning Satanism. And it's like, I would be okay with using that metric always. But then again, there's overlap there where you'd be splitting down the middle, where some things are like 49-51, and then there's like a group of positive externalities you just nuked off the planet. So to make it more specific and singular, I think if we're talking just specifically about religion, a one-time instance, one-time example, not reaching into anything else, you could probably legislate a law that was singularly instanced like that, right? Like, if you started the bill by being like, no other religions besides these two mentioned, and then it's like Christianity and Satanism will any of this law affect these two? It's like only these two. And it's like, with that, you can't be a Satanist. That way it doesn't override people who want to be Buddhists or whatever, or want to practice, Islam. It's just very specifically like, you can't practice the antis to these religions. Like, we do not respect that. And that's something I could get along with. But again, like, that's a far shot away. Like, not along, you wouldn't even get support from people on the right for that, right? The people, they're too concerned with what the New York Times would say about them. So you try to push something like that, they're going to be like, well, come on, dude, you're going to lose my moderate base. Okay. Like, all right, let's not do anything to help the country. But the broader point with that being, though, is I guess I'm more so saying it to you where it's like, I think that the experiment of allowing people to have the freedom of religion has resulted in this. Now, I know what you're putting forward, which is we've been infiltrated, maybe multiple times, if not once, if not one great time at the very beginning. And so your answer was to be more vigilant of that, which I agree with. I'm just thinking like if the experiment failed in the 1700s, I have much less faith in that experiment if we were to reset it and start it again with all this convenience in the first world technology that we have, that people would be more vigilant if we were to restart that experiment now and then move it forward. Like, I just don't see that. I mean, pragmatically speaking, I just think people are too comfortable, too convenient to care about vigilance as much as they need to. And you see this resulting with people like Anna Kasparian, who's now, blowing up on TYT with the Young Turks, even getting yelled at by her co-host, forget his name, Cenk, because, she's finally at the point where she's been hit in the face with reality too many times. And, she pointed out, like, she had that 3-minute segment where she's like yelling at the top of her lungs, like, they dismembered bodies. She's like, if this means like I'm leaving the left, then I'm okay with that. And and I think somebody made the point to this, which is like, looks like she got mugged, and it's like she had some ounce of reality hit her that like woke her up. And that's where I feel like we're at. Like, I feel like people won't do the hard work or do the hard things that are necessary until it is instrumentally shown to them at the cost of like bodily harm. And that's, I mean, it's pathetic, but I think if we're being realistic about everything, I think most people kind of sit in that spot where they only look at things as long as they're comfortable doing so.
Yeah, but those people eventually wake up, like Anna Kasparian, like is having that moment now. Although it doesn't look like Cenk is quite caught up with her, because he's like, no, we're still on the left. We didn't want them to, let out murderers chopping out bodies. Like, yeah, you did.
He's doing damage
that was your
control.
whole platform.
Yeah.
But even that kind of connects to what I was saying earlier. Like, you think you're gonna start a movement, and because you had control of starting the movement, that you're going to have control of stopping it. But once you get a movement going, the momentum is going to take it to its natural conclusion, which is what happened with leftism.
Yeah, yeah.
And it could happen with the right too. Like, that's why both sides make me nervous. And I also very much believe in a uniparty establishment that sometimes operates on both sides. So that makes me more fluid to be able to kind of turn on the right left dichotomy very easily. But some people don't, they have too much loyalty to be able to abandon the idea once the idea gets dangerous, and I think that's more the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't think it needs to be said, but I think it does for some people. Like, the principles never abandon the party abandons the principles. So the point being with that, it's like you should be somebody who is principled, right? Like, you should be somebody who has your own principles. You don't align from someone first. You align within yourself first and look outward to see who has the most overlap, like who does share the most of the values. It's like, you're not going to ever really find, unless you are like an NPC, you're not going to find somebody whose viewpoints and their politics line up, a 99% match, let alone 100% match. And that's, I think, like the sad thing about it is like, I don't even understand how people could be so tribal when it seems like there's so many different shades of gray. Like, especially when you look at the conservative, I mean, maybe it's different on the left-hand side of things, on the left-hand side of politics. I try to avoid listening to leftists because I like to not be angry throughout my days. But when you look on the right, I mean, you look at even between like Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro, like, they're both fall in like the Christless conservative camp for me, but they both have differences and opinions amongst themselves. The same way you could throw Tim into that group, and they're all three going to have differing opinions. They're all going to have different sets of viewpoints. They might harsh disagree on some things as well, which is why I always find it hard or misunderstand, I guess, how people can be so tribal, because I've always felt the opposite. I've always felt like it's been so easy for me to always walk away from a tribe because it's just like, you guys don't, I thought you guys were about something, but you're not. Okay, see ya, like, bye. Like, you know, like I'm the, what do you call that? I'm the hobo on the train, dude. And like, I just ain't found home yet, man. Like, and that's the way it makes me feel. But seemingly it's different for most everybody else. Like, they have to operate on a tribal signal. They have to get a tribal cue in order to move forward with something they want to say. Or if it's the opposite, they'll say nothing because they fear what the tribe may do to them in response. And I just like, I don't understand that. But I don't think either me or you do. We're both very independent. I mean, you're like, you're very well involved with the subculture that's not very, I would imagine maybe tribalistic in the subculture, but outside of that, your politics just bounce around. You're in the center for a lot of things. So you're not really tribal in that aspect. I just don't understand it. I mean, I get it for most people who don't pay attention. Go ahead, my bad.
No, it's okay. I understand it. They're fighting fire with fire out of desperation. That's what's happening. They're saying we are fighting a tribe, which is right. Leftism is a tribe. But they are in lockstep. You're not allowed to have a differing opinion. They have commandments, essentially. You have to believe in these things to be part of the group. And the right wing is kind of like, you know, the uniting of Germanic tribes, right? They're all different, but we're uniting against, you know, a common enemy. So you find more differing opinions, definitely on the right. And you find less hatred of other opinions
Yeah.
on the right, for sure.
Yeah.
But like, I understand why they're trying to form collectives, because they understand that they've been taken over by a collective, which, you know, again, it's fighting fire with fire out of desperation. And I get that, but to say, well, you know, they're trying to install an authoritarian government to control our lives, so our response to that should be to install our own authoritarian government. I think that's misguided, because if you believe in the uniparty, the establishment, and the fact that, you know, there isn't a level above our politics that can buy politicians, then you understand that either way that you go, they win, right? So that's why I kind of hang out in the center. Although it's funny because I consider myself right wing.
Yeah. But that's the Overton window being so small.
I haven't found my people.
Right. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think that I'm in a little bit different situation where, like, I feel like I am for the first time, like with this October 7th and this whole Candace Owens, the Daily Wire, this conservatism stuff that, you know, that I've been railing at for my entire YouTube career. Is now like I'm seeing it, like I'm seeing the people kind of separate themselves from the establishment group. So like for me, I'm finding myself really aligning with people like, you know, like Elijah Schaffer. I mean, there's one account on there, what is it, 9mm SMG, like on X, like I almost like agree with almost 95% of what he says. Like the Jake Shields, the Hodge Twins, Lauren Shen now, Nick Fuentes, the America First Movement, Sovereign Bra. Like there's very well becoming like a new right, you know, on this sphere. Now, it's unfortunate that it's happening like in the moment of the 2024 election year, like we're leading right up to that. Now, I don't think any of this is going to actually whatsoever affect the presidential election. I think everybody in all those camps are still going to vote for Trump, albeit some of those in that group will probably vote for Ron DeSantis. But regardless, like what you had said, we're uniting. It's like the Crusades, dude. It's like, it doesn't matter. We're all marching under the band of Christ, dude. We have to get rid of whatever this thing is. And that's essentially how the right's kind of uniting. So I have no fear when it comes to that. My fear does come, however, from the 4 years after that, because I think that the right's really going to want to work down and chisel against themselves, which then puts us again back in this position where we have a Republican in power as president, but then we're going to have a fighting body in Congress, and nothing's probably going to get done. A lot of things will get stomped, which then goes back to this authoritarianism that we want to fight. So then if Trump wants to get stuff done, it'll be executive order, executive order, executive order. And every single one of those installs another branch of, you know, most of them being individual instances, but all of them extend some level of power, you know, and then each president from that one can look back and be like, well, actually, because this president issued this executive order, I'm going to issue the same exact one based on that precedent that he issued with no precedent. And it's just like, it's just kind of like this singular cycle where they could just keep eating up and buying up more power with that. But I think it's good. I think it's something the right's needed for a long time. I think a lot of people have kind of said like, well, the right has their differences in opinions. But me and you both know the actual alt-right doesn't even exist in the right, in the mainstream. They're not allowed to. And this has all been, point in case by Nick Fuentes, the Groypers. And I'm sure there are those that are even further right than him, the neo-Nazis, people that I wouldn't even care to associate with. I imagine they have some good things to say, and they're probably a bit easier to get along with than leftists, but who am I to know? Because again, like they just don't exist on these platforms. And so I think the new right was, again, it's like just a time bomb, ticking time bomb. So it was bound to happen, especially if we are all having the goal of getting the freest speech possible. There can only be so many times where you say, I'm a free speech absolutist, forgive me, but not those guys, and everyone's doing it to Nick. And I don't think it's fair, but is there
I don't either. And I like that there's a new right. And like, if we've talked about this a little bit before, you very rarely will see me arguing with like radical leftists because I think they're useless mainly to argue with. Most of what I do is try and hold this new right that I see forming accountable when they're inconsistent, or when I want to be the canary in the coal mine when we start pushing authoritarianism, and our views become inconsistent, right? Because if we're going to have protected classes and police certain kinds of speech, you're just trading a a new thing in for the old thing that's very similar to the old thing. So I want to make sure that like while the new right is forming, we keep these people that are kind of leading the charge accountable.
like being the e-brake,
so
essentially.
that they don't turn into the thing that we're fighting. Which it is easy to do, especially if you're, getting millions of dollars from donors and investors and things like that.
Yeah, which I don't know if you saw this. Did you see the clip of Destiny talking about all these new connections and networks he got after he went to Israel, or he got that, or he got some kind of Israel connection? It was just hilarious because they play like the clown music in the background, and it's like, of course, the goy tells everybody that they paid him. And it's weird too, because like I'd have to look into a bit more of it and follow up with it. But it's like a 2-minute clip of him being like, yeah, man. He's like, yeah, when I went to I can't remember what organization it was, but it's some organization related to Israel. And he's like, yeah, afterwards I had like 2 people call me. I set up this meeting. They're going to get me the connection to this person here. And it's playing like that clown music in the background because everybody knows like he got the call, quote unquote. But it's stuff like that that's leading people to be in this new right. And I think it's going to be important that we do have people that e-break it, because I don't want it to be authoritarian as well either. Because again, I think like you, I'm in the same boat where I'm like, I don't know how much of Fuentes' group is joking when they talk about things such as like genocide on that level as well. I don't want to put words in people's mouth either, but like that's also something I'm not cool with. I am a Christian more than I am anything else. But when I see like the good values that he puts forward, it's the same kind of problem with like, Andrew Tate almost, but he's allowed to talk on these platforms where he says like 60 to 70% of what he says, you can be like 100% like, oh yeah, dude, of course. Yeah. And then there's like 30% of what he says where he's like, who thinks that? Like, no, like, oh, come on, dude. And it kind of soils your entire image of the guy because it's like, it's something so far out there. Where with Andrew Tate, it's like the only way that he thinks that you can get value is by owning like a sports car and banging hundreds of women at a time. And it's like, I don't agree with that whatsoever. I don't think that's a good father. I don't think that's a good man. So, and that's a tangent. But I think it's in the same light with Fuentes.
But if your goal is to get followers, eventually you're going to do that, right? If that's the goal that you set out with, I'm going to get followers, I'm going to make this a career, I'm going to, build a business based around my opinions, like eventually that's going to happen, right? You're going to say extreme things because that's what gets attention. I think both of those gentlemen have fallen victim to that. Again, like trying to say edgy or extreme things because that's what gets views. It's just where your goals are, right? Like I don't I have people, well, I definitely have people that have already called me out for being like, well, you're not extreme enough. Like, you're saying it's okay to criticize Israel, but you're not like, you should be saying let's condemn Israel, you know what I mean? And I'm just not that guy. I'm not going to condemn a whole group of people for the actions of maybe 10% of the group.
Yeah.
But everybody on that platform wants you to be the extreme version of what you are. So if your goal is money or followers or likes, like, eventually you're going to get lost. And my goal when you asked me to do this was like, I need an outlet to say what I think and to sharpen my own belief system.
Right.
So my goal is just different. So hopefully if your goal is also different, you won't end up damaging your message for cloud, essentially, which is what I think happened probably mostly to Andrew Tate. Nick was just young, being edgy on the internet like kids do.
Well, yeah, I had said back to you with Fuentes was like, with him being so young and him like it being like a very singular issue that he was, you know, essentially excommunicated for. Like, I think he just dug his heels in as deep as he possibly could on that issue. And I think he ended up with a treasure trove and really didn't know what to do with it. And I think that's why when you hear him be so articulate and he can be like, oh yeah, no, and that guy's linked up with Peter Thiel and Peter Thiel worked with this organization over here. And yeah, I know those two guys, they work with him. And it's just like the dude knows his shit. Like, you can't listen to him and be like, oh, like, you don't know what he's talking about. So that's why I think it was formative for him. It was like, he even says it himself on that Spaces with Boring. Like, he looked up to Jeremy, he looked up to Ben, he looked up to Ben Whittle, and they turn around and then he's getting bumped out the whole studio after they all gave him praises because he's asking this one specific question. And then now he feels that he has been slighted for no reason. And especially he was 17 when this happened, 17 or 18. I mean, at that point then too, given the fact that he was articulate as he was, as intelligent as he was, my thought process is he probably spent the next 3 months like, tell me everything about every Jew ever. And he's like on his computer, like Steam, like he's got like 40 cups of coffee and he just like, and he ripped it out there. And now he's got his whole entity and being is a political, I guess, view that is entirely opposed to everything that the Daily Wire is, which is why he is such a force. And so because he's so well read, he's so articulate, that's what made, and he's super charismatic. He's got the charisma of Trump, but he's smart. He's not dumb. And that's not to say like Trump's dumb, but Trump's not the intellectual type of, what would you say? He's not like the nerd intellectual. He's business intellectual. He's savvy. So like he can be quick-witted, fast on his feet. And Nick Fuentes is those things as well, but he's also someone who's got like a powerhouse of a brain too, which I think he would even add to more of the fears of like, oh, what if this kid gets power, right? Like what if this kid moves on to actually enter the political arena? He's going to be somebody who's going to be really, really hard to deal with, especially when he does already have all this ground and grassroots support. Forgive me, man, I keep coughing. I just see it as he's a powerhouse, and people always like to call, people, point out Trump. He's like a once in a generational, talent, and like, we're not going to get this again. I'm sitting here looking, I'm like, dude, I think Fuentes is like, he's that same generational type of talent too. Like, I think you give it another 10 years, he might be in that political arena. And if he's not, it's still on that same light of like, he's got a news organization. He's got people who align themselves with his group. And so when you get, Congress people go out, instead of having the MAGA tag, they're going to have the AF tag. And they're going to be people who are all kind of associated and aligned with the Nick Fuentes side of politics.
It's possible. I hope he softens out if he goes that route by that point, at least a little bit. But if not, I'll be a thorn in his side, just like I'm a thorn in everyone else's.
Yeah. It's natural.
And it's not even a dislike for these people, right? Like, the consistency thing bothers me because if you watch one of these leftists and they're like, oh, well, do you think children should chop off their genitals? And they say, well, it's their body, it's their choice, they're old enough to make the decision. And then they are asked, well, do you think kids should get tattoos? And they're like, no, they're not old enough to decide that. That's what I see from these people, and it's stupid and I don't like it, which is why I call it out. But it's also because you're making us look bad by being inconsistent.
Yeah.
You don't listen to that person after they've shown you that they have no principles and they're just deciding thing on thing based on how they feel. That's a problem for me, which is why I'm mostly like trying to hold our side accountable, because I think it's the people that are still in the left at this point are the cult people. They are not changing their minds no matter how much information they give them. So the idea that I should waste my time arguing with them instead of holding people that I relate to or that are closer to me accountable and making sure they're consistent and that we're at least close to on the same page is important to me. So
Yeah.
I mean, I think everybody should do that, especially if you're following somebody like us or Nick or Timcast or Daily Wire. Like this whole like, oh, I don't want to attack my own side. Like you need to hold them accountable. Otherwise, this movement could go off the rails just like the left. And it can happen so easy. And nobody seems to notice until it's too late, except for a very select few people.
Right. And it's like that lack of vigilance. That's what I'm saying, dude, because people just get so comfortable. They outsource things. Like the biggest thing that I can put out or make sense or the analogy to make it sense is the outsourcing of masculinity. Most men for the most part, don't get into that many fights. They're not that physically peaked. They're not even like that oriented. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a lot that are. But a lot of that comes from the fact like they outsource their masculinity to the cops, right? Like they don't handle things on their own. Your house gets broken into. A lot of guys are going to end up calling the cops to take care of the majority of it. Where a lot of guys, there's still a few minority who are going to take care of everything on their own. And same thing goes, all the way down the line, whether it was, your car gets stolen, yada, yada, yada. And so now, but we have outsourced masculinity. So in that same light, we've outsourced our vigilance to mainstream news publications, expecting them to be doing all of the good work for the people, which is, making sure these corporations don't do bad things that hurt the environment and making sure our politicians don't scam the American people. Well, the reality is all those institutions got infiltrated. I mean, Operation Mockingbird happened, Lord knows how long ago at this point. And everything's outsourced. And you can stretch that to almost everything. Like so much of people's lives are outsourced to some other aspect. I mean, hell, when you go to the grocery store, your hunting and gathering has all been outsourced completely to another company. You essentially just got to go and pick out what you want from the pickings. And so I think when you stretch that, that's what I think there is such a lack of vigilance, is because people are so overwhelmingly comfortable. Everything has been handed to them on a platter. They default to, why would I be vigilant? Like, why would I care? Or not even default to that. It's because they're so comfortable. There's not even a thought to be vigilant because it's so comfortable. Like, what could be so wrong if everything's so comfortable?
Well, it's because of how advanced we are as a civilization, right? Anytime you get a civilization big enough, eventually people are going to be hyper specialized, right? Like I'm not going to be farming and hunting and gathering. I'm going to have one specialized skill set and I'm going to use that skill set, and then other people are going to have different skill sets like farming, hunting, gathering, things like that.
Yeah.
Right. So I think no matter what you do, as a civilization advances and a population increases, people are going to become more specialized. Like I communicate for a living. I make my whole living on just being able to talk to people. Right, that's a very specialized skill set. Now, it doesn't mean I don't know how to do any of those other things, or I shouldn't, but it is just a symptom of the society that the bigger that we get, the more specialized each person's skill set is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't have one person that we expect to be a doctor, a cop, and a firefighter. We have different people that have spent their life specializing in single skills. Right, so like unless we go back to like a barter system, and I have to learn how to farm my own goods, then I mean this is just kind of the way it's going to be.
Yeah, which is why I call into question the ability to reset, the original political system our founding fathers instituted, which is I think what's only going to get more and more specialized. The reason why I think it's great that you brought up the specialization is because I was going to link it to The Catcher in the Rye, right? I mean, like if you remember the instance in there's an instance, I believe it's in one of the beginning of portions of the chapters. They go to get an elevator ride, but there's a person who's in this elevator. But this person is considered their class, I think it's like a D, they're called like a class D specialized person. And their only specialty is to listen to the commands of the people who enter the elevator and then press the correct floor they need to go to. And that's this guy's only specialty. That's his only purpose in life. And so far to the point that he doesn't have eyes. He literally has no eyes. They didn't deem it to be necessary to provide him with the genetic material to give him eyesight. Because why would he ever need it? Because all he's ever going to do is push an elevator button. Now, I get it's a hypothetical, and it's way out there with The Catcher in the Rye. Or I believe it's The Catcher in the Rye. Forgive me if it's the wrong book I'm thinking of.
Is it? The Catcher in the Rye is about like a kid like ditching high school, and he looks older, so he goes and tries to act like an adult. I don't.
Yeah,
it wasn't like a dystopian.
I'm thinking of an Aldous Huxley book. That's what I'm thinking of. Let me look
I don't
this up.
remember that in The Catcher in the Rye.
We don't be wrong here. Yeah, for you, I might have completely missed that.
Minority Report.
Let me look up this. Is it Brave New World? Yeah, it's Brave New World. Yeah. Brave New World. Forgive me. I don't know why I thought Catcher in the Rye. Yeah, but in Brave New World, that's one of the symptoms in this dystopian society, right? I don't know if you've read the book at all, if you're familiar with Brave New World, but these people are insanely.
Quite some time, but.
Okay. Well, that's what I made me think of was we get so specialized to the point that you don't even know what you've lost. You know, you've become so. Our society is so ready to put someone in a position that's so singular. That's like your only purpose in life is to pick up this car door and attach it to this Honda Civic. Now do that 400 times for 8 hours, 5 days a week, and for the end of time. And I think if that's someone's life, I think people lose something, right? Like if that's all your life, that means you've essentially outsourced literally everything else about yourself. And when it comes to the work relationship setting, to just.
And your job's not who you are.
No.
Right? Like my job isn't who I am. It's what I do to make sure that my family can eat. You know, one day hunting might be what I did to make sure they could eat. Now it's talking to people on the phone, you know? I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that. Sure, if like your whole life is to attach a car to a door, that's kind of a bummer, but that's not your whole life. That's just your job. Your job isn't who you are. It's what you do to survive, right? You know, one day it would have been growing your own food and hunting animals. Today it's doing whatever stupid shit somebody will pay you to do.
Right. No, and I think that there's positives that go with
which isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? Because like we don't need to know how to do everything. You just have to get, you know, sufficient at a couple of things and take advantage of a couple of good opportunities to survive.
No, agreed. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I think there's positives with it entirely. I think there's more positives than there are negatives. I'm just saying, are we unaware of what those negatives may be? And I'm specifically pulling on the string of one of them, which is like, I mean, then look at cops, for example, right? The average cop, it still has the majority of all of his masculine faculties. So you would pen the average cop would be able to chase down a man within 50 meters, right? The average cop.
Most of them are on juice.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, possibly.
They're all on gear.
I mean, it could be possible. But I guess in the same time, in that same light, though, like their specialization then allows for them to then be, what would you say that? Further grounded into like what they naturally were meant to be. And so like I think that then that allows for them particularly, I think when you're in those environments, your specialization is, you know, being masculine and enforcing. You are by proxy of that a more masculine man in every other avenue. Now, if it was the other way around, right, where it's like, say like I was a bodybuilder, you know, all through college, I went to the gym, I was this great football star, and then I become an accountant and I'm an accountant for the next like 30 years. Well, I'd imagine how I would look if I was an accountant for 30 years at the end of my lifespan versus if I became a cop, and that, you know, the same hypothetical, that same person then decides to be a cop at the end of that 30 years, I see the cop still having the better quality of life due to the fact of what his specialization is, because he's still further grounded in what his natural environment is as a man. Where over that same time period, the accountant, and this isn't to say that all masculinity is rooted in just physical labor, but the majority of what develops your masculinity is physical labor. So then you go to the accountant, and then over time, he whittles, his brain is, you know, is fast as lightning, dude. Super intelligent man, extremely sharp, but he's lost all of his, he's lost all of his muscles, his body kind of broken. He sat in a chair for long periods of time. I think at the end of that, then it's like the accountant, although they both had different specializations, the accountant is now at a, what would you call that? So then say you go, okay, now the accountant and this cop go fight. Well, who do you think wins? Right? It's crazy hypothetical, but I'm just stretching the point to
I feel like you're making.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I feel like you're making so many assumptions. I'm friends with my state's strongest man. Like, he went and competed for the state's strongest man and won. He works at a corporate job doing the same thing I do. He talks to people on the phone. He does paperwork at a desk.
But you're
Like,
saying,
people
but
aren't
that's an
one
exception,
just
though.
because you're an accountant.
But I would argue that's an
Huh?
exception. Are you saying that that's like?
I don't think being a cop yields necessarily a better, happier life than being like
I didn't say
mankind
happier
is
life.
always killed.
I would never argue a cop.
Oh, I thought you.
No.
Oh, okay. I thought that's what you had said. I don't know. Like, your priorities create who you are. If your priority is fitness, you're going to be fit no matter what your job is. And I don't think being a cop is like more natural than like being an accountant, as far as like, sure, it's maybe more masculine as a job, but like, is there really anything natural about like making it your whole life to put yourself in somebody else's business, or put yourself in dangerous situations, or situations where you might have to kill people? And you know, I was a Marine Corps brat, and I've known a lot of people that because of their job have had to take other people's lives, and it's not natural. Like, we do it, we've done it for all time, but it's not natural. You're not supposed to do it, and it fucks you up unless you're, you know, like a psychopath or a sociopath. Like,
Yeah.
even if you're built different and you're, you know, a lifetime soldier, like, it takes a toll to take another human's life.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, nowadays, this is the point I'm making. This is the overarching point I'm making. Is that's because people are too comfortable. Like, if you go, you know, all the way to 18 and you're just playing football, and you know you're going to high school and you're in your classes, and then you get to go to lunch, and then you go to Vietnam, well then, yeah, I mean, dude, like, of course it's going to F you up. I mean, in 1100 AD, though, it's like, when these things are more commonplace, the average lifespan is like, what, half of what it is now, if that even, you know, probably even low 30s. I think the cop, what that situation, what you're saying, always being in danger, is closer to the natural ground roots of what a man was going to be. I'm only making the point that because of all of these things, all of this outsourcing at a huge level and all these different avenues, has made it so the average person almost has no willingness nor sees the necessity to be vigilant about anything, because everyone else is always taking care of something.
I think it would be useful if we did kind of got into what the goal for humanity is, right? Because if the goal for humanity is to live a happy, simple life until we're inevitably wiped out by an asteroid, then wouldn't it be great if we all went back to farming our own food? But if the idea of the human race is to keep the human race around, we need to get off the planet. We need to be on several different planets, because eventually one's going to get hit with an asteroid. And if we want to keep the human race as something that goes into the future, we are going to have to make some sacrifices, right, with the way we live.
Yeah.
Like if we reverted everything to where everybody had to grow their own food and hunt, we're never going to make it off the planet, and eventually the planet's done for. And then humanity ends with the people that it ends with, right? Instead of us branching out to different areas. So although I do want to be left alone to live a simple life, I also want humanity to carry on indefinitely into the future, because I think what we've done is not all great, but it is something special, clearly.
Yeah, it's
And I
creation.
do want to see us advance. So society, even though I like to live the way, I'd like to live in a way where I grow my own food, it just doesn't suit up with my goals of, the human experiment and legacy.
And I agree with
Right,
that.
because if we slowed everything down and reverted it to when we were happier and we were all taking care of ourselves, that does impact the goal of humans being something that goes on indefinitely into the future.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying though. Is like this advancement, this technological advancement, this evolution, it's natural and it's inevitable. So what I'm saying,
If you want people to be more comfortable with taking human life, I would argue it's a good thing that, and I don't even know if it's something that maybe, because neither of us can really say that if you went back in time, they had an easier time with it. Sure, they dealt with it and they did it, but as far as we know, it's always been unnatural for you to kill your fellow man, and it's never been good for you.
Then, well, let me argue this then.
I like that I don't want people to be super comfortable with taking each other's lives.
Which I agree with that. Let me point it to a different direction then to make it more sense here. Do you think then in 1100 AD, the average man had a much easier time, slaughtering the cows that they raised than you would imagine the average man would be able to slaughter a cow now?
Yeah, probably. It's a necessity more often.
Yeah, and so that's why I'm like, this is why I'm saying like the psychology of the average man has clearly weakened.
Oh, well, that's for sure. That I won't argue about, but I mean, that part is true, but like we live in a different world. Like I don't expect, like you said, you brought up like, we're not all getting into fistfights. I'm an adult. I'm not like regularly getting into fistfights. I've been in a bunch throughout my life. It was a big part of my upbringing, but like I'm different now. My life has changed, so I don't act like that anymore, right?
Yeah.
I'm more apt to have a conversation with somebody if they call me a name than just, go off on somebody physically for looking at me wrong, because I'm a different person and I've adapted to a different lifestyle. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. It's just the progression, right?
Yeah.
And I see the same thing with humanity, right? Our adaptation isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just a progression, very much not including the extra chemicals and extra feminization that was put on top of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't think that we need to be like men in 11 AD, but I also think they are actively trying to feminize society. And I did bring up earlier in the show that possibly the whole game is that we're all just some kind of androgynous blob, and that's what they want out of human beings.
Well, no, I feel like I'm getting you too caught up on the masculine femininity stuff of it. My point being mainly is that because we can both agree that the specialization and the advancement of technology has allowed for the comforts to take place so that you and I don't have to go out and slaughter animals. You and I don't have to go out and hunt for our food. So I'm saying if we both can agree and we see that down the line, more technological advancement is going to lead to more specialization, further breakup, further divide, more outsourcing. I'm saying then to turn it back to the very beginning of this conversation, which is if we were to revert back to this system our founding fathers wanted to institute from 1776, which was allowing people to have free and full choice, but knowing that piece of parchment was only going to be eligible for a religious people and a vigilant people. But we know the further down this line we go, the more comfortable people get, the less willing they will be to be vigilant or even want to be. That's why I'm arguing, I think it then necessitates some ounce of authoritarianism to be added to that system and the system change. which is why then I argue for things more so along the lines of instituting a much more stronger bound head of state Christianity tied to these things, rather than leave it be the system as it was so open, because I think it's too easy to exploit, it's too easy to be abused. And I don't have faith in my fellow men to be vigilant either. It's like, to me, it's like I look at a system like that and I only see me as being the someone who has anything to lose by it. I guess that's the point I was making, is the further we get and the problem's going to keep getting worse in terms of the vigilance and comfortability, I think that it necessitates a need for a further authoritative measure to ensure vigilance of the system.
I think you can do it culturally. I think if the culture that we lived in pushed patriotism, like the culture that we grew up in, and part of that was your duty as a citizen to be vigilant and to take care of your community, I think we can fix a lot of these problems culturally without an authoritarian government necessarily stepping in. But we need to actually do that, right?
Yeah.
Like the culture turned everybody into soft people. I think the culture can turn them back into hardened patriots that are, concerned about their country, and the values that they uphold are tied to that country. I think you could do all that culturally. I've seen it done. Like, we used to say the Pledge of Allegiance every day. People were proud to be Americans. They lived by the ideals and the values that the culture told them, this is what our American values are. And that culture was able to change their values into, oh, well, it's not about equality or, freedom or liberty. Now it's about, gay people and whoever's getting oppressed currently. Like, so if the culture was able to get us from one place to this shitty place, then it should be able to get us back without needing an authoritarian. We just need people pushing the right culture.
Which I do agree with that. I think we're looking at the last bit of timetable for that to be possible. I think if we go another 8 years of Republican Trump, but we get very little policy to change things, especially when it comes to the socially conservative aspect, I think the timetable is going to run out. I think the pendulum will begin its swing back to the left-hand side, because, I'm sure in those 8 years of Trump's presidency, there will be some puritanical measures that would have been passed. And then I think if it does that, I think then we'll probably move into the chapter of removing the Republic. You'd probably get into the chapter of people who want to eliminate all the republic systems that we have and move things to be a more democratic nation where it's pure democracy, mob rule. That's why I'm saying all these things, where it's like, I think there's still time to change things culturally, but I think we're essentially kind of running out of time. And I think, you even said yourself, like, a good chunk of those people who are still on the left are the cultists. Like, they're the people who, like, it doesn't matter what you put in front of them. Like they've picked their side. They believe they're on the right side. They want to be on that side. And that's why I kind of see how much, because when you look at, like, when nations get divided, it doesn't take very long before those sides become formative and then they oppose each other. And I think we're on the tail end of people picking their sides, walking away from one side, joining the other. And I think it's going to be really telling what happens culturally in the coming 8 years. Lord, please, if Trump's elected, it's going to really, really hinge on, I think, the way that things are taken care of. Now, if things can follow like a Ron DeSantis kind of policy, outside of the anti-Semitic stuff he was trying to pass, but like, very harshly opposing the LGBTQ mantra that's in schools, the presence of the books, like being able to do drag in public. I think if you can get that nationally in all states, like gone, eliminated, those are good steps. But to me, it's still that vigilance aspect, right? Like, people are still really only generally concerned about like the surface, shallow level, top of the top, mainstream stuff that most people talk about. And so maybe I'll get proved wrong. I just really don't have much faith in the average person anymore. And that's kind of where I'm at with things. I think once again, we might enjoy a high for these 8 years, but in these 8 years, like, the Democrats were doing this, they were doing this, they were doing this. And it's like, I just don't want to sit through the same sad story one more time. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I think it's it won't be one more sad story. I think when you look at like things like inflation measures, you look at like the national debt, like I don't think we're going to have a time for one more sad story. And so is it worth waiting for the culture to catch up? Or is it more important to just like cut your losses and say, F it, like do this because we at least know it'll save us for 20 years and not 4. And that's kind of where I'm at, because I think the stakes are a lot higher than what people really honestly realize, especially when it does come to the housing market, when it does come to the lack of reporting on numbers. You know, I think people kind of get this idea that there's only 10 million illegal immigrants. I think their minds are going to be blown when the U.S. Census is pushing almost 400 million people come the next one that gets released. I don't know, and I'm saying this too because I'm compiling all this stuff together with East Palestine, with all the Boeing 7X7s jets falling apart, with the Francis I can't remember the name, but I think it's Boston Francis Key Bridge getting taken out.
It's the Francis Scott Key Bridge.
Francis Scott Key Bridge, and then there's like another one in Oklahoma that got hit by a barge ship just a couple of days ago that wasn't getting talked about. Like, I mean, at a certain point, it's like it's really going to get bad. And it's really going to get dangerous when you're surrounded by a bunch of people who grew up in, playing with crayons until they were 24. And that's kind of the way I feel, where I feel jaded on the fact of like, I feel like I'm going to be targeted, I feel like I'm going to get attacked, and I don't want to have to be the only person who can save someone out of a burning building within, 2 miles. Like, only so many times I can make it up these stairs, man. I'm going to die in here. Like, and things like that make me really, really terrified for the future. And that's why I kind of am preparing myself to accept a more authoritative government system for like facing the future, especially because of all of the dialect and discourse that's happened here recently, and seeing how the Daily Wire discourse went with Candace Owens. And I see we're getting here to the end here. I actually totally forgot to bring up this one last news piece here, because it's like, I think it's really important to pull up on screen. Let me do this. Do I have enough time? Oh, we're already past 8. Forget it. We'll do it right now. Let me switch over to my screen because it was a bombshell report, and I think it needs to be at least covered a slight bit. I'll talk about it. I'll read through it really quickly. Again, it's going back to the Candace Owens saga. I apologize we didn't get to any of the other portions we had tied in here. But I'm going to just say this from Censored Men. This account's caught my eye for a while. They've also seemingly kind of aligned themselves outside of the establishment Republican narrative. But again, this is what it says. Bombshell leak, Candace Owens was fired for saying Christ is king. And this is the main part here. There were 4 Daily Wire employees who were all Christians who approached the Censored Men account. They're keeping their identities remaining anonymous. And they leaked information about an impromptu town hall that Jeremy Boring hosted on the day of Candace's firing. Now, it says here that Boring sent the email to all Daily Wire employees, inviting them to an impromptu town hall in Candace Owens' studio. The town hall was led by Boring, with Andrew Klavan repeating many of the corporate talking points on the show the next day. And if anybody saw Andrew Klavan's show, the following day was torn to pieces. He had multiple bits go out where he was just kind of essentially walking the line with what he was saying with regards to Judaism and its moral superiority over Christianity. They view it as an extreme form of damage control to scare and prevent employees from speaking out against Candace Owens' firing later that day. They said that they think that the employees think that the town hall was meant to brainwash them. They're saying it was straight up propaganda. The feeling was that they didn't just want her gone, that they wanted to demonize her, essentially. I mean, they said that they wanted to hate her like Ben does. So that means I'm assuming that some employees are under the belief that Ben hates Candace Owens. And then there were the subjects that were brought up during the town hall, and there were a couple, 3 really. Candace Owens' repeated use of Christ is King was deemed anti-Semitic. They played a clip of Nick Fuentes chanting Christ is King and compared it to what Candace Owens did, suggesting that just by those associations, Candace Owens is an anti-Semite. And then some other weird thing here, which is, I've watched the Fresh and Fit thing. They have this ka-ching sound often. It's a soundboard. They play it when people say dumb things or they have good takes, like a money take, like things of that nature. The Daily Wire then said that this was an attempt to associate her with the stereotype that Jews love money. Like, if anything, that is the most egregious one of all of the things that were said here, because if anyone who's watched Fresh and Fit, like, they have a soundboard, they play things all the time. They probably have like 4 different sounds for money making. But this is the reality. This is where we're at here. The Daily Wire is about to suffer some serious damage. They're going to do their best to do damage control. I think Ben's already done that. Ben had a bishop on and acted and played along with this kind of conversation with paying his homage to Christianity, and it was so fake. I think anybody who watched it kind of got that feeling that it was extremely fake. So as you know, just so you understand, they do view Christ as King is deemed anti-Semitic, and saying it outside of any environment or context that they deem correct is viewed as hateful. And that's just where we are. And so if anybody wanted to know, the Daily Wire has announced they're becoming the Israeli Wire. There's more to that too. Candace Owens had commented on it. We won't get to it today. We ran past the 8 o'clock mark. So let me go ahead and put it back on Donny here. I don't have anything else I need to point anything to. We have some other things we didn't get to on the news. We'll get to that maybe throughout this week, or I'll attach them to next week. But again, make sure you like, subscribe, share the show if you enjoy it. But let me turn it back to Donny. Anything you want to say? Closing statement, my good sir.
No, I'm Donny Brook. You can follow me on Twitter. If you do already follow me, I apologize. Shit posting is mostly what I do there. So
It's good shit posting though. I can actually say that. But I do want to say thank you to everybody who was here, who watched along. I know we had concurrent viewers the entire time. I appreciate that from start to finish. Anybody who chatted in here, don't be afraid. I know Kukla chatted in here almost all by herself. I appreciate that. We appreciate any and all engagement. Even if you disagree with us, I imagine most people might disagree with me, more certainly disagree with Donny, but let us hear it. We'll go back and forth with it. We'll play with the ideas while we're talking here. No announcements. Look forward to the show coming up next Monday. We'll be sure to do that. I'm trying to add again a second additional episode. I might just have to do it solo. I think I'm all out of co-hosts, guys. I think it's just me and Donny at this point. So we'll see. But keep in tune. Stay with me on X. You'll see the updates there. And again, appreciate you, Donny. Take care. Have a good rest of your day, brother. I appreciate you.
You too, man. Later.